The chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel cast golden light across 300 guests, and Michael Torres had never felt more certain of anything in his life. He stood at the altar in his tailored black suit, watching Elena walk toward him in a cascade of white silk and lace, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo, her eyes fixed on his with a tenderness that made his chest ache. She was everything he had ever wanted: intelligent, kind, beautiful in a way that seemed almost impossible, and in moments she would be his wife. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and tears and the soft rustle of tissues among the guests. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Michael kissed her with the confidence of a man who believed he had found his forever. The applause erupted around them, and Eleanor smiled against his lips, her fingers squeezing his hands as if she never wanted to let go. But even in that perfect moment, something stirred at the edge of Michael's awareness, a detail he could not quite name, a feeling he could not quite place. The reception hall was magnificent. Crystal glasses clinked, champagne flowed, and the live orchestra played Sinatra classics that made the older guests sway in their seats. Michael moved through the crowd with Eleanor on his arm, accepting congratulations from colleagues, friends, and family members he had met dozens of times before. But scattered among them were faces he did not recognize, men in expensive suits who stood too straight, whose eyes moved too carefully, who seemed to watch the room rather than celebrate in it. He noticed them near the doors, near the windows, near the service entrances. Michael leaned close to Elena's ear. "Who are those men, sweetheart? I do not recognize them from either of our guest lists." Elena's smile flickered for just a fraction of a second. "Friends of my father," she said smoothly. "Business associates. You know how he is. He insisted on inviting a few people from his work." Michael nodded, accepting the explanation. Elena's father, Vincent, was a successful businessman with interests in construction, real estate, and import-export operations across the eastern seaboard. Michael had met him several times during the 2 years he and Eleanor had been together, and each time he had found the older man pleasant but reserved. Polite but private. The kind of man who asked questions but rarely answered them. Still, something about the explanation did not sit right. Michael pushed the thought aside. This was his wedding day, the happiest day of his life. He was not going to let paranoia ruin it. The hours passed in a whirlwind of toasts and dances and laughter. Michael's mother cried during her speech. His best friend David made inappropriate jokes that had the groomsmen howling and the bridesmaids rolling their eyes. Elena's mother, a graceful woman named Carmela, watched everything with quiet satisfaction, her hands folded in her lap like a queen surveying her kingdom. And Vincent. Vincent sat at the head table with an expression Michael could not read. Pride, perhaps, but something else too, something guarded, something waiting. Near midnight, the guests began to thin. The orchestra packed up their instruments, the catering staff cleared the tables, and Michael found himself standing alone near the bar, nursing a glass of sparkling water. He had stopped drinking hours ago, wanting to remember every moment of this night with perfect clarity. Eleanor appeared, beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Ready to go upstairs, husband." Michael smiled at the word, husband. He would never tire of hearing it. More than ready, wife. They made their way through the remaining guests, accepting final embraces and well-wishes, and then stepped into the private elevator that would take them to the penthouse suite. The doors closed, and for the first time all day, they were alone. Elena leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "We did it. We did it." The elevator rose in silence, and Michael pressed a kiss to the top of her head. But as he did, he caught his reflection in the polished metal doors, and behind it, something else. A shadow. A shape. The silhouette of a man standing in the corner of the elevator car. Michael turned sharply, his heart lurching, but there was no one there. Just empty space and the soft hum of machinery. Elena looked up at him. "What is wrong?" "Nothing." Michael shook his head. "Nothing. Just tired." But it was not nothing. And he was not just tired. Some instinct, some primal awareness buried deep in his nervous system was screaming at him that something was very, very wrong. The elevator opened onto the penthouse floor, and two men in dark suits stood waiting in the hallway. They nodded at Elena with familiar respect, then stepped aside to let the newlyweds pass. Michael felt their eyes on his back as he walked, and the weight of their attention was like a physical pressure against his spine. The suite was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline. A king-sized bed sat against one wall, draped in white linens and scattered with rose petals. Candles flickered on every surface, and a bottle of Dom Perignon waited in a silver ice bucket. Elena moved through the space with easy familiarity, kicking off her heels and reaching back to begin unfastening her dress. Michael watched her, this woman he loved, this woman he had married, and felt the question rising in his throat, like something he could no longer swallow. Elena. She turned, her fingers still working at the buttons. Yes. Who are you? The question hung between them like a held breath. Elena's hands stilled, her expression shifted, cycled through surprise and calculation, and something that looked almost like relief. What do you mean? She asked carefully. Michael gestured at the door. Those men in the hallway, the men at the reception, the way your father looks at everyone like he is assessing whether they are a threat. He took a step toward her. I am not stupid, Elena. I am a federal prosecutor. I rid people for a living. And something about tonight, about your family, about all of this, does not add up. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she crossed to the window and stared out at the glittering city below, her reflection ghostly against the glass. I wanted to tell you, she said quietly. So many times I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid you would leave me. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw real fear in her eyes. Afraid you would see me differently. Afraid you would hate me for who my family is. Michael's heart was pounding now. Who is your family, Elena? Tell me the truth. She took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she had kept locked away for years. My father, she said, is Vincent Moretti. He is not just a businessman, Michael. He is the head of the Moretti family. One of the most powerful organized crime organizations on the East Coast. She paused, letting the words settle. I am the daughter of a mafia boss, and now by marriage, you are part of this family too. The world seemed to tilt beneath Michael's feet. He reached for the back of a chair to steady himself, his mind racing through every interaction he had ever had with Vincent, every strange detail he had dismissed, every warning sign he had ignored. Elena watched him with eyes that pleaded for understanding. I never wanted this life, Michael. I went to law school to escape it. I built my career to prove I could be something other than my father's daughter. And when I met you, you were so good, so honest, so completely outside of that world. I fell in love with you because you made me believe I could be different too. Michael stared at her. You lied to me. For 2 years, you lied to me. I omitted, she said. There is a difference. Is there? Eleanor crossed to him and took his hands. I love you. That has never been a lie. Everything I feel for you, everything we have built together, that is real. The only thing I hid was my past, and I hid it because I was terrified of losing you. Michael looked down at their intertwined fingers. Her wedding ring glinted in the candlelight. His own ring felt suddenly heavy on his hand, like it carried the weight of 1,000 decisions he had not known he was making. What happens now? He asked. Elena squeezed his hands. Now, she said, you meet my father. Really meet him, and you decide what kind of husband you want to be. Before Michael could respond, there was a knock at the door. Firm, deliberate, the kind of knock that was not asking permission. Elena released his hands and moved to answer it. When she opened the door, Vincent Moretti stood in the hallway, still dressed in his reception suit, his silver hair immaculate, his expression unreadable. May I come in? He asked. Elena stepped aside. "Of course, Papa." Vincent entered the suite with the careful grace of a man who had spent decades navigating dangerous spaces. He nodded at Michael with something that might have been respect or might have been assessment. "Congratulations on your marriage," he said. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who never raised it because he never had to. "I apologize for the circumstances of this conversation. I had hoped Elena would tell you sooner, but she has always been protective of the things she loves." Michael found his voice. "With all due respect, Mr. Moretti, I am a federal prosecutor. Do you have any idea what kind of position this puts me in?" Vincent smiled, the faintest curve of his lips. "I am aware." He moved to the window, gazing out at the same skyline his daughter had studied moments before. "Let me be direct with you, Michael. I am not asking you to compromise your principles. I am not asking you to look the other way or to participate in anything that violates your oath. What I am asking is much simpler. And what is that?" Vincent turned to face him. "I am asking you to love my daughter, to protect her, to give her the life she deserves, far from the shadows I have spent my life navigating." He paused. "Elena is my only child, my greatest accomplishment, and she chose you. That means something to me." Michael looked at Elena, who stood between them with tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I do love her," Michael said slowly. "I married her because I love her. But this—" He shook his head. "This changes everything." Vincent nodded. "I understand, and I will give you time to process. But know this, Michael." He stepped closer, and despite his measured tone, something in his presence commanded attention. "The moment you said I do, you became family. And in my world, family is everything. We protect our own, we support our own, and we never, ever betray our own." The weight of the words settled over the room like a physical thing. Michael felt them pressing against his chest, demanding a response he was not ready to give. "I need time," he said finally. Vincent nodded. "Of course." He moved toward the door, then paused. "But do not take too long. The world we live in does not wait for men who cannot decide what they stand for." He glanced at Eleanor with unmistakable tenderness. "Good night, Tesoro. Be happy." And then he was gone, leaving Michael alone with his bride and the shattered remains of everything he thought he knew. Eleanor crossed to him slowly. "Michael." He looked at her, really looked at her, the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had vowed to spend his life with, the woman who had kept a secret so massive it threatened to unravel everything they had built. "I need to think," he said. "I know. I do not know what this means. For us, for my career, for everything. I know. But—" He paused, searching for words that felt impossible to find. "I meant what I said at the altar, for better or worse. I just did not know how much worse that might mean." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She stepped into his arms, and despite everything, despite the lies and the revelations and the impossible situation they now found themselves in, Michael held her. Because whatever else was true, this was true too. He loved her. And love, he was beginning to realize, was never as simple as he had believed. The candles flickered, the city glittered beyond the glass, and somewhere in the distance, Michael could have sworn he heard the sound of a future being rewritten. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one, stories that pull you in and never let go, are exactly what we create here. If you want to experience more moments that make your heart race and your soul wonder, subscribe now and join the family. 3 days after his wedding, Michael Torres sat in his office at the United States Attorney's Southern District of New York, staring at a file that had nothing to do with his current caseload. It was a file he had pulled from the archives himself, using credentials he technically should not have used for personal purposes. The label on the folder read simply, Moretti V. The contents were extensive: surveillance photos spanning 2 decades, wiretap transcripts, witness statements that led nowhere. A constellation of suspected crimes, from racketeering to money laundering to activities that hovered in the grey spaces between business and corruption. and at the center of it all, like the eye of a hurricane, sat Vincent Moretti. Michael had spent 3 days in a fog. He had gone through the motions of work, attending meetings, reviewing briefs. But his mind was elsewhere. It was in the penthouse suite where his world had cracked open. It was in the face of his wife as she confessed the truth. It was in the steady gaze of his new father-in-law as he spoke of family and loyalty and protection. He had not told anyone, not his colleagues, not his friends, not his mother, who had called twice to gush about how beautiful the wedding had been. How could he? What would he say? By the way, I accidentally married into organized crime. Any advice? The irony was not lost on him. He had built his career prosecuting exactly the kind of people his wife's family represented. He had sent men to prison for decades for the same activities that had apparently funded Elena's private school education and Columbia law degree. He had stood in courtrooms and spoken passionately about justice and accountability and the rule of law. And now he was married to the daughter of a man whose file sat in a cabinet labeled Active Investigations. Michael closed the folder and rubbed his eyes. He needed to make a decision, but every path forward seemed to lead somewhere worse. His phone buzzed. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen. "Are you coming home for dinner?" He stared at the message for a long moment. Home. Their apartment in Tribeca, which he now realized had probably been purchased with money that had origins. He did not want to examine too closely. Their life together, which he now understood, had always been built on a foundation of omissions and half-truths. "Yes," he typed back. "Be there by 7. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and turned to look out the window. The Manhattan skyline stretched before him, the same skyline he had admired from the penthouse on his wedding night. It looked different now. More complicated, more layered, full of shadows he had never noticed before. When Michael arrived at the apartment, Elena was in the kitchen, moving between stove and counter with practiced efficiency. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air, and for a moment it was easy to pretend that nothing had changed, that they were still the couple they had been a week ago, planning their honeymoon, debating paint colors for the spare bedroom, living in blissful ignorance of the empire that lurked just beneath the surface of their lives. Elena looked up as he entered. "There you are. I made your favorite." Michael set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. "Smells amazing." She smiled, but there was uncertainty in it, the same uncertainty that had lived in the space between them since their wedding night. They had been careful with each other these past few days. Gentle, like two people testing the edges of a wound to see how deep it went. "How was work?" she asked. "Fine. The usual." She nodded, not pushing. She understood that he needed time. She understood that she had handed him an impossible puzzle and could not expect him to solve it overnight. They ate dinner in near silence, the kind of silence that was not quite comfortable, but not quite hostile either. When the plates were cleared and the wine was poured, they settled on the couch together, their bodies close but not touching. "I met with my father today," Elena said finally. Michael tensed. "And he wants to have dinner, all of us. This weekend, at the family home." The family home. Michael knew what that meant. The sprawling estate in Westchester, surrounded by acres of manicured grounds and layers of security, so sophisticated they could probably track a bird flying too close to the property line. "Is that a request or a summons?" he asked. Elena turned to look at him. "It is an invitation, Michael. My father is not going to force you into anything, but he wants you to understand our world, to see it from the inside, not just from surveillance photos and wiretap transcripts." Michael flinched. "You know about those. I know you have been researching him." Elena's voice was calm, without accusation. "I would have done the same thing in your position, but those files only tell part of the story. They tell the story people like you, prosecutors and investigators and federal agents, want to believe. They do not tell the whole truth. And what is the whole truth?" Elena was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. My father is not a monster, Michael. He is a complicated man who inherited a complicated legacy. Yes, he has done things that would horrify you, things I do not approve of, things that keep me awake at night sometimes. But he has also built schools in neighborhoods the city forgot about. He has funded medical clinics and addiction treatment centers and scholarship programs for kids who would never have a chance otherwise. She paused. The world he lives in is not black and white. It is gray, all of it. And the only way you will ever understand that is if you see it for yourself. Michael let her words settle. He thought about his career, his principles, his sense of right and wrong, and he thought about the woman beside him, the woman he loved, the woman who was asking him to step into a world he had spent his professional life trying to destroy. One dinner, he said finally. I will come to one dinner, but I am not making any promises beyond that. Eleanor leaned into him, her relief palpable. That is all I am asking. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Westchester look like a painting. The leaves were turning, splashing the landscape with golds and crimsons, and the drive up from the city was almost peaceful enough to make Michael forget where they were going. Almost. The Moretti estate sat at the end of a private road, hidden behind iron gates that swung open as Elena's car approached. Michael watched as the house came into view, a sprawling stone structure that looked like it belonged in the Italian countryside, rather than 45 minutes from Manhattan. Gardens surrounded the main building, meticulously maintained, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the sound of water, probably a fountain or artificial stream designed to mask other sounds. Elena parked near the front entrance, and before they could exit the car, two men appeared. Michael recognized the type, the same straight posture, the same careful eyes, the same sense that they were always evaluating, always assessing, always ready. Mrs. Torres. One of them nodded at Elena. Mr. Torres. Welcome. Mr. Moretti is expecting you in the study. They were led through a foyer that could have graced the pages of Architectural Digest, past rooms filled with art and antiques that probably cost more than Michael's annual salary. The house was beautiful, undeniably, but it also felt like a fortress. The walls were thick, the windows were reinforced, the staff moved with quiet efficiency that spoke of training, not just employment. Vincent's study was at the back of the house, overlooking a garden that seemed to stretch forever. The room itself was lined with books, real books that looked like they had actually been read, and a massive oak desk sat near the windows. Vincent stood as they entered, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater, looking for all the world like a retired professor rather than the head of a criminal empire. Michael. Eleanor. He embraced his daughter, kissing both cheeks, then extended a hand to Michael. Thank you for coming. I know this is not easy for you. Michael shook his hand. It is not. Vincent smiled slightly. Directness. I appreciate that. Please, sit. Carmela is preparing dinner, but we have time to talk first. They settled into leather chairs near the fireplace, where a low fire crackled despite the mild weather outside. Vincent poured whiskey from a crystal decanter, handing glasses to Michael and Elena before taking his own. I imagine you have questions, Vincent said. Ask them. I will answer as honestly as I can. Michael studied the older man. In his career, he had interviewed hundreds of witnesses, suspects, and defendants. He knew how to read body language, how to detect deception, how to find the cracks in a carefully constructed facade. But Vincent Moretti gave nothing away. His posture was relaxed, his expression open, his voice steady. Either he was the most accomplished liar Michael had ever encountered, or he was exactly what he appeared to be, a man who had made peace with his choices. How long? Michael asked. How long has your family been involved in organized crime? Vincent considered the question. My grandfather started in the 1920s. Prohibition, bootlegging, the usual story of immigrants finding opportunity where legal avenues were closed. By the time my father took over, we had diversified. Real estate, construction, import and export, some legitimate, some less so. He took a sip of whiskey. When I inherited leadership, I made a decision. I would move. Just toward legitimacy, step by step. It has been a long process. And yes, there are still aspects of our operations that exist in grey areas. But we are not what we were. Not even close. Michael leaned forward. And what are you now? We are a family, Vincent said simply. One with significant resources, significant influence, and significant responsibilities. We protect our own. We invest in our communities. We maintain relationships with people in positions of power because that is how the world works, whether you are a criminal or a corporation. He met Michael's eyes. I am not going to pretend we are saints, but I am also not going to let you believe we are monsters. Michael glanced at Eleanor, who sat quietly beside him, watching the exchange with an expression he could not quite read. What do you want from me? Michael asked. Specifically. Vincent set down his glass. I want you to keep doing exactly what you do. Prosecute criminals, uphold the law, build your career. I have no interest in compromising your integrity or putting you in impossible positions. Then why tell me any of this? Because you are family now. Vincent's voice softened. And family does not keep secrets, not the kind that matter. Elena loves you. That means I love you. And that means you deserve to know the truth about who we are and what we represent. Michael sat with the words. They were not what he had expected. He had anticipated threats, either subtle or overt. He had expected to feel like a pawn in some larger game. Instead, he felt like he was being invited into something. A circle, a trust, a bond that transcended legal definitions. I need to think about all of this, Michael said finally. Vincent nodded. Of course, take all the time you need. But know this, Michael. He leaned forward, his gaze intense but not threatening. I have watched my daughter for 32 years. I have seen her struggle with her identity, with her place in this family, with the weight of our legacy. And I have never seen her as happy as she has been since she met you. That happiness is worth protecting, whatever it takes. Before Michael could respond, the door opened and Carmela appeared. Dinner is ready, she announced. They moved to the dining room, where a table set for four waited beneath a chandelier that sparkled like captured starlight. The meal was spectacular, course after course of traditional Italian dishes prepared with obvious love and skill. The conversation flowed, carefully avoiding the weightier topics, focusing instead on easier subjects, travel, food, the renovation Elena wanted to do in their apartment. But throughout the evening, Michael could not shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to the life he had known, the clear moral certainties, the black and white distinctions between right and wrong. The other path led somewhere new, somewhere complicated and challenging and potentially dangerous, somewhere that felt, despite everything, like it might also lead to something meaningful. As they drove home that night, Elena reached across the console and took his hand. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For listening, for not running, for giving my family a chance. Michael squeezed her fingers. I have not made any decisions yet. I know. But you are still here. That is enough for now. The city lights rose before them as they crossed back into Manhattan, and Michael found himself thinking about something Vincent had said. Family does not keep secrets. Not the kind that matter. Maybe that was true. Maybe the foundation of any relationship, whether by blood or by choice, was built on truth. Even uncomfortable truth. Even dangerous truth. He did not know what the future held. He did not know if he could reconcile his principles with his new reality. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He loved Elena. And love, he was beginning to understand, meant learning to navigate the grey. 6 weeks after the wedding, autumn had surrendered to winter, and the first snow of the season dusted the streets of Manhattan like powdered sugar on a wedding cake. Michael stood at the window of his office, watching the flakes drift past, thinking about how much his life had changed since that night at the Grand Meridian Hotel. He had not told anyone the truth, not his colleagues, who continued to assign him cases involving organized crime, not his mother, who called weekly to ask about grandchildren, not David, his best friend, who kept making jokes about Michael finally settling down. The secret sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and immovable, reshaping everything around it. But something strange had happened in those 6 weeks, something Michael had not expected. He had started to understand, not accept, not embrace, but understand. He had begun to see the world through different eyes, the eyes of a man who now had access to information that existed outside official channels, the eyes of a husband whose wife occasionally mentioned things about how the city really operated, things that never appeared in case files or newspaper articles, the eyes of a federal prosecutor who was slowly realizing that the line between legal and illegal was far blurrier than he had ever wanted to believe. His phone buzzed. "Eleanor, dinner with my parents tonight. Do not forget." He smiled despite himself. These dinners had become a regular occurrence, every Saturday at the Westchester estate. At first, Michael had attended out of obligation, determined to remain guarded and watchful, but somewhere along the way the guardedness had softened. Carmela had won him over with her warmth and her cooking and her endless questions about his childhood. Even Vincent had become less of a symbol and more of a person, a complicated man with complicated motivations who genuinely seemed to love his daughter and want the best for his new son-in-law. "I remember," Michael typed back. "See you at 6. He turned from the window and returned to his desk, where a case file waited. The name on the folder was familiar. Castellano R. Ricardo Castellano, a mid-level operator in a rival organization, one that had been making aggressive moves into territories that had traditionally belonged to other families like the Morettis. Michael stared at the file for a long moment. 6 months ago, he would have pursued this case with single-minded determination, eager to add another conviction to his record. Now, he found himself wondering about the broader implications. What would happen if Castellano went to prison? Who would fill the vacuum he left behind? Would it be someone better or someone worse? He closed the file without opening it. These were dangerous thoughts, the kind of thoughts that could compromise everything he stood for. His door opened and his supervisor appeared. Sarah Chen was a formidable woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for fairness that made her respected by colleagues and defendants alike. "Torres," she said, "you have a minute, of course." Sarah closed the door behind her and took the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to check in. You have seemed distracted lately. Everything okay at home?" Michael kept his expression neutral. "Everything is great. Just adjusting to married life, you know." Sarah nodded slowly. "Newlywed phase. I remember it well." She paused. "Listen, I am asking because I care about you, Michael. You are one of our best. And I do not want to see personal stuff affecting your work." "It is not," Michael assured her. "I promise." "Good." She stood, apparently satisfied. "Oh, and one more thing." She gestured at the Castellano file on his desk. "That case is being transferred to another office. Jurisdictional issues. Someone else will handle it from here." Michael blinked. "Transferred? By who?" Sarah shrugged. "Above my pay grade. But it happens. Do not worry about it." She left, and Michael sat in the silence of his office trying to process what had just occurred. The Castellano case transferred. The same case that involved a rival of the Moretti family. The same case that, if pursued aggressively, could have created problems for his father-in-law. Coincidence? Maybe. Probably. But some part of Michael knew better. Some part of him understood that in his new world, coincidences were rare. The dinner that night felt different. The Moretti estate was festive, decorated with early hints of Christmas, and Carmela had outdone herself with a feast that could have fed twice as many guests. But beneath the warmth and laughter, Michael sensed something else. A tension, an anticipation, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. After the meal, Vincent invited him for a walk. They strolled through the grounds, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, the security detail maintaining a respectful distance. "I understand you had an interesting day at work," Vincent said casually. Michael's guard went up immediately. "What do you mean?" "The Castellano matter. I heard it was transferred." "How did you know that?" Vincent smiled. I have friends in various places, Michael. It is nothing sinister, just information. Did you have something to do with that transfer? Vincent stopped walking and turned to face him. The older man's expression was serious but not threatening. Let me ask you a question, Michael. If that case had proceeded, what would have happened? Castellano goes to prison for a few years. Meanwhile, his organization continues operating under new leadership. Probably someone more ruthless, someone with less restraint. People get hurt. Neighborhoods suffer. And what changes? Nothing. The system continues exactly as it always has. That is not the point, Michael said. The point is justice, accountability, justice. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. I believe in justice, Michael, but I also believe that true justice requires understanding the consequences of our actions. Sometimes, the letter of the law and the spirit of the law point in different directions. Sometimes the best thing for everyone is to look at the bigger picture. Are you asking me to look the other way? I'm asking you to see clearly. Vincent's voice was gentle. I have never asked you to compromise your integrity, and I never will, but I am asking you to recognize that the world is more complicated than the cases you build in courtrooms. Good men sometimes do questionable things for good reasons. And bad men sometimes hide behind the law to do terrible things without consequence. Michael stood in the cold, watching his breath drift away, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing against his chest. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. Vincent placed a hand on his shoulder. Be a good husband. Be a good man. Use your position to do genuine good, not just to accumulate victories. And when you face decisions that are not clear-cut, think about the outcomes, not just the rules. They stood there for a moment, two men from different worlds trying to find common ground. Then Vincent smiled and patted his shoulder. Come. Carmela will be wondering where we disappeared to, and I believe she has made tiramisu. They walked back to the house together, and Michael found himself thinking about everything Vincent had said. It was dangerous thinking, the kind of thinking that could lead him down paths he had always sworn to avoid. But it was also honest, and after 6 weeks of lies and secrets and impossible moral calculations, honesty felt like something worth holding on to. When they returned inside, Eleanor was waiting, her face bright with laughter at something her mother had said. She looked up as Michael entered, and her smile widened. There you are, I was about to send a search party. Michael crossed to her and kissed her forehead, just getting some fresh air. Elena studied his face, reading whatever she found there, and seemed satisfied. Good talk with Papa. Good enough. They settled in for dessert and the conversation turned to lighter topics, but throughout the evening, Michael kept returning to Vincent's words. See clearly, think about outcomes, understand consequences. Maybe that was the answer, not abandoning his principles but expanding them, not compromising his integrity but developing a more sophisticated understanding of what integrity actually meant. Or maybe it was the first step down a road that had no good destination. He did not know. He might never know. But he was beginning to accept that uncertainty was part of life now, part of love, part of being family. After dessert, when the evening was winding down and the guests were saying their goodbyes, Elena's younger cousin Marco approached Michael near the fireplace. Marco was 22, studying business at NYU, and had always regarded Michael with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Can I ask you something?" Marco said quietly. Michael nodded. "Go ahead." Marco glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Do you really love her, Elena? Or is this just some kind of arrangement?" Michael met the young man's eyes. "I really love her, more than I have ever loved anything." Marco studied him for a long moment. Then his expression softened. "Good. She deserves that. She deserves someone who sees her, not just the family she comes from." He walked away, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the sounds of family and the lingering sweetness of Carmela's tiramisu, Michael made a decision. He would find a way to make this work, not by abandoning who he was, but by growing into someone new, someone who could hold complexity without being destroyed by it, Someone who could love without conditions and live without certainty. It would not be easy, it might not even be possible, but for Elena, for this family, for the future they could build together, he was willing to try. Right now, if you are watching this moment, unfold and feeling something stir inside you, let me know. Leave a comment that says exactly this: I believe in complicated love, because that is what this story is about. That is what life is about, and I want to know that you understand. Winter deepened, and with it came changes that Michael could not have anticipated. The first was professional. In January, he received an unexpected promotion, elevated to a senior position that gave him more authority and more responsibility. Sarah Chen had recommended him personally, citing his exceptional judgment and his ability to see the bigger picture. The irony was not lost on Michael, who had spent the past few months developing exactly that ability, though not in the way Sarah imagined. The second change was personal. In February, Elena told him she was pregnant. They were sitting in their apartment, snow falling outside the window, when she handed him a small box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a pair of tiny baby shoes and a positive test. Michael stared at the items for a long moment, processing their implications. A child. His child. A new life that would carry both his blood and the Moretti blood. A being who would grow up straddling two worlds, just as Elena had, just as he was learning to do. "Are you happy?" Elena asked, her voice uncertain. Michael looked up at her. "Happy?" He pulled her into his arms. "I am terrified, Elena. I am overwhelmed. I have no idea how to be a father or what kind of world we are bringing this child into. But yes," he pressed a kiss to her hair. "I am happy." The news spread quickly through both families. Michael's mother cried for 20 minutes on the phone, already planning baby showers and nursery themes. Vincent and Carmela invited them to the estate for a celebration dinner, where Vincent raised his glass and spoke about legacy and continuity and the joy of watching a family grow. But beneath the celebrations, Michael sensed something else. A shift in the dynamics, a heightening of the stakes. He noticed it first in the security around Elena. The two guards who had always maintained a discreet presence became 4. A driver appeared, assigned to take her anywhere she needed to go. New protocols were implemented for their apartment building, including additional cameras and a doorman who was clearly more than just a doorman. "Is this necessary?" Michael asked one evening. Elena looked up from the book she was reading, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "My father is cautious, you know that. This seems like more than caution." She hesitated. "There have been some concerns, nothing specific, just general instability in certain areas. Papa wants to make sure we are protected." "What kind of instability?" Elena set down her book and met his eyes. "The Castellano organization," she said quietly. "After their leader went to prison, as you predicted, a new regime took over. They are more aggressive, more unpredictable. There have been incidents." Michael's chest tightened. "Incidents, territory disputes, intimidation tactics, nothing that has touched us directly. But my father believes in preparation, not reaction." Michael sat with this information. He thought about the case he had been working on before it was transferred. He thought about Vincent's words about consequences and bigger pictures, and he thought about the child growing inside Elena, the child who would be born into a world where incidents and instability were part of the landscape. "What happens now?" he asked. Elena reached for his hand. "Now we continue living our lives. We go to work. We prepare for the baby. We have dinner with our families. We do not let fear dictate our choices. And if fear is the appropriate response, then we feel it," Elena said simply, "and we keep going anyway." March arrived with the promise of spring, but the thaw brought complications instead of relief. Michael first learned about the situation through official channels, ironically enough. A joint task force was being formed to address rising violence connected to organized crime, and as a senior prosecutor, he was briefed on the intelligence they had gathered. The picture painted was disturbing. The Castellano successors were waging a campaign of expansion, targeting businesses, intimidating rivals, and creating chaos that affected innocent bystanders. None of the briefings mentioned the Morettis by name, but Michael understood enough now to read between the lines. The territories under pressure were the same territories where Vincent's legitimate businesses operated. The intimidation tactics were directed at people connected to the Moretti network. The violence was not random, it was strategic. He brought his concerns to Elena one night, choosing his words carefully. "I need to know," he said. "Is your father involved in what is happening out there?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down the prenatal vitamin she had been about to take and turned to face him fully. "Involved is a complicated word, Michael. Uncomplicate it for me." She took a breath. "The Castellano people are targeting our interests, our businesses, our associates, our community, people we have protected for generations. My father has a responsibility to respond. Respond how?" Elena's eyes held his. "In ways that keep our people safe, in ways that restore stability, in ways that do not involve innocent casualties or unnecessary violence." Michael felt the familiar tension between his two selves, the prosecutor and the husband, the man of law and the man of family. "I cannot know details," he said finally. "Whatever is happening, whatever your father is doing, I cannot know specifics. I understand. But," he reached for her hand, "I also cannot pretend that I am completely separate from this. If something happens to you, to our child, because of these conflicts, I will never forgive myself for standing on the sidelines." Elena squeezed his fingers. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I will not compromise my oath. I will not participate in anything criminal. But if there are ways I can help that stay within legal and ethical bounds, if there is information I can provide or guidance I can offer, I am willing to consider it." Elena studied him for a long moment. Then something in her expression shifted. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude, or something deeper. "You have changed," she said softly. "I have grown." She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "My father was right about you." "What did he say?" "He said you were stronger than you appeared, that beneath the prosecutor and the law and order persona was a man who understood that true justice sometimes requires uncomfortable choices." Michael held her close, feeling the slight swell of her belly against him, the promise of new life, the weight of new responsibility. "I still believe in justice," he said. "I know. But I am beginning to believe that justice is more complicated than I ever imagined." The next day, Michael requested a meeting with Vincent. They met at a restaurant in Midtown, a quiet Italian place where the staff knew to give them privacy, and the menu featured dishes Michael had never seen anywhere else. "Elena told me about your conversation," Vincent said after they had ordered. Michael nodded. "I want to help, within limits." Vincent leaned back, assessing him. "What kind of help do you have in mind?" "Information, analysis, understanding how the system works from the inside." Michael paused. "I have spent years building cases against organizations like the Castellanos. I know their patterns, their weaknesses, their pressure points. I know which parts of their operation are vulnerable to legal intervention and which ones would require other approaches." Vincent listened without interrupting. "I am not going to do anything that violates my oath," Michael continued. "But I can share knowledge. I can help you understand where the official investigations are focused and where they are blind. I can help you make decisions that minimize collateral damage and maximize effectiveness. And in return," Michael met his eyes, "in return, you keep my wife and my child safe. You resolve this conflict as quickly and cleanly as possible. And you continue the transition toward legitimacy that you described when we first spoke." Vincent was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "You know," he said, "when Elena told me she was dating a federal prosecutor, I was concerned. I thought she was making her life unnecessarily complicated. But now I see that she knew exactly what she was doing. She found someone who could bridge two worlds, someone who could help us evolve." "I am not doing this for you," Michael said. "I am doing it for her, for them." I know. Vincent raised his glass. And that is exactly why I trust you. To family. Michael lifted his own glass. To family. They drank, and somewhere in that moment, an alliance was forged. Not between a prosecutor and a criminal, between two men who loved the same woman and were willing to do whatever was necessary to protect the family she carried inside her. It was not the path Michael had imagined for himself. It was not the clear moral certainty he had once believed was the foundation of a meaningful life, but it was real. It was honest. And for the first time since his wedding night, Michael felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The cherry blossoms bloomed in Central Park, painting the city in shades of pink and white. Elena's pregnancy progressed beautifully, her body changing in ways that made Michael fall in love with her all over again each day. And slowly, gradually, the violence that had threatened to consume everything began to recede. Michael never knew the details. He did not want to know, but he understood enough to recognize when the tide had turned. The Castellano organization's expansion stopped, then reversed. Key figures disappeared, some into prison through legitimate prosecutions, others into circumstances that were never explained. The pressure on Moretti-affiliated businesses eased. The additional security around Elena was reduced. At a dinner in May, Vincent raised his glass and announced that a new era of stability had begun. "We have weathered the storm," he said, his eyes moving around the table to meet each family member's gaze. "Not without cost, not without sacrifice, but we have emerged stronger than before, and we have gained something precious in the process." He looked at Michael, a bridge between our world and theirs, a chance to continue our evolution towards something better. Michael accepted the words without comment. He had played his role, such as it was. He had provided information and analysis, always staying within the boundaries he had established, always maintaining the separation between his professional obligations and his family ones. Whether that had made a difference, he could not say. But the result was what mattered: peace, safety, a future for the child who would arrive in just a few months. In June, Elena went into labor 3 weeks early. Michael was at work when he got the call, and he barely remembered the journey to the hospital, only fragments of traffic and panic and desperate prayers to whatever forces might be listening. By the time he arrived, Elena was already in the delivery room, surrounded by doctors and nurses and the controlled chaos of bringing a new life into the world. He held her hand through the hours that followed. He watched her struggle and fight and triumph. And when the cry finally came, thin and reedy and impossibly beautiful, Michael wept in a way he had not wept since he was a child himself. A daughter. They named her Sophia after Elena's grandmother, a woman Michael had never met but who, according to family legend, had been fierce and loving and impossible to ignore. Sophia was all of those things from her first breath. The days after her birth passed in a blur of sleeplessness and joy, and the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from caring for something so tiny and so precious. Michael took 2 weeks off work, spending every moment at home, learning to change diapers and warm bottles and soothe cries that seemed to have no cause and no cure. Elena recovered with remarkable speed, her body and spirit resilient in ways that amazed him. Within days, she was up and moving, managing the household, receiving visitors, radiating a contentment that seemed to transform every room she entered. The family came, of course. Michael's mother stayed for a week, helping with the baby and crying every few hours from sheer happiness. Vincent and Carmela visited daily, bringing gifts and food and the quiet presence of grandparents who understood that their role was to support without overwhelming. And through it all, Michael kept thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The wedding night, revelation, the months of adjustment and evolution, the conflicts and compromises and impossible choices, all of it leading to this moment, this child, this family. One evening, when Sophia was 3 weeks old, Vincent arrived alone. He found Michael on the terrace of the apartment, staring out at the city while the baby slept in a bassinet beside him. "May I join you?" Vincent asked. Michael nodded, and Vincent settled into the chair beside him. "She is beautiful," Vincent said, gazing at his granddaughter. "She has Eleanor's eyes." "She has her grandmother's stubbornness," Michael replied. "Already refuses to sleep when we want her to." Vincent smiled. "A Moretti trait. We are all stubborn. It is how we survive." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of the city twinkle like earthbound stars. "I want to thank you," Vincent said finally. "For what?" "For everything. For loving my daughter. For accepting our family. For helping us navigate a difficult period." He turned to meet Michael's eyes. "And for becoming the man you have become." Michael considered the words. "I am not sure I have become anyone different. Just more myself, maybe." "That is what growth is." Vincent nodded. "Not becoming someone new, but becoming more fully who you always were." "And who is that?" "A man who understands that principles matter, but so does pragmatism. That justice is important, but so is mercy. That law serves society, but family serves the soul." He paused. "You have learned to hold all of those things together. That is rare. That is valuable. That is why I am proud to call you my son." Michael felt something shift in his chest. He had spent his whole life seeking approval from teachers and mentors and supervisors and peers. But this approval felt different. It felt earned. It felt real. "Thank you," he said simply. Vincent nodded and rose. "Get some rest. Babies do not stay babies for long, and you will want to remember these moments when she is a teenager and refusing to listen to anything you say." He left, and Michael sat with his sleeping daughter, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, marveling at the mystery of how something so small could contain so much potential. The summer passed in a haze of first smiles and first laughs, and first sleepless nights that somehow, improbably, became treasured memories rather than trials to endure. Sophia grew with astonishing speed, transforming from a helpless bundle into a curious, alert infant who studied the world with eyes that missed nothing. Michael returned to work, but something had changed. He approached his cases differently now, not with less dedication, but with more nuance. He thought about the families affected by his prosecutions, the children who would grow up without fathers, the communities destabilized by aggressive enforcement. He did not stop doing his job, but he did it with a fuller understanding of its consequences. In August, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He went to Sarah, Chen's office, and asked to be transferred, not out of the department entirely, but into a division that focused on white-collar crime and corporate malfeasance rather than organized crime. It was a lateral move, not a step down, but it would remove him from the conflict of interest that had haunted him since his wedding night. Sarah studied him across her desk. "Can I ask why?" Michael chose his words carefully. "I have realized that my effectiveness in organized crime cases has been compromised. Not by anything I have done, but by circumstances I cannot change. I want to continue serving justice, but in an area where my judgment is not clouded by personal considerations." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "You are one of the most self-aware people I have ever worked with, Torres. That is rare. That is valuable. I will make the transfer happen. Thank you." He left her office feeling lighter than he had in months. It was not a perfect solution. There probably was no perfect solution, but it was the best he could do to reconcile his two worlds without abandoning either one. That night he told Elena about the decision. She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "Are you sure?" she asked finally. "I am sure." Michael reached for her hand. "I cannot be the best version of myself if I am constantly navigating conflicts of interest. This way, I can still do meaningful work, still serve justice, still build my career, but without the constant tension of wondering if my personal life is affecting my professional judgment." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "You are a good man, Michael Torres. I am trying to be. That is all any of us can do." They sat together in the quiet of their apartment, Sophia sleeping peacefully in the next room, the city humming softly beyond the windows. "We have built something real," Elena said softly. "We have. Something that can last. I hope so." She leaned into him, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "Whatever comes next," she whispered, "we face it together." Michael pressed a kiss to her forehead. Together. And in that moment, surrounded by everything he loved, Michael knew that this was what it meant to be truly home. 5 years passed like a river flowing toward the sea. Sophia grew into a fierce, intelligent, impossibly charming little girl who had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw. She attended a private school in Manhattan, where her quick mind and quicker tongue made her both a teacher's delight and a teacher's challenge. She called Vincent Nonno and Carmela Nonna, and she had the entire extended Moretti family wrapped around her tiny finger. Michael's career flourished in his new division. He became known as one of the most effective prosecutors of corporate crime in the Southern District, building cases against fraudulent executives and corrupt financiers with the same dedication he had once applied to organized crime. The work was different but equally meaningful, and he went home each night knowing that he had done something worthwhile without compromising his integrity. Eleanor had evolved, too. She left the corporate law firm where she had worked for years and started her own practice, focusing on immigrants' rights and civil liberties. It was work that mattered to her, work that allowed her to use her skills and her family's resources to help people who had no other advocates. The Moretti Foundation funded several of her initiatives, and Vincent took quiet pride in watching his daughter build a legacy of her own. The transition Vincent had promised continued, year by year, generation by generation. The empire that had once operated in shadows moved increasingly into sunlight. Real estate development, hospitality, clean energy investments. The old ways were not forgotten, but they were fading, replaced by strategies that did not require looking over shoulders or wondering when the next indictment might come. And through it all, Michael and Elena's love deepened in ways neither of them could have predicted. Marriage, Michael had learned, was not a destination, but a journey. It was a daily choice, a constant negotiation, a willingness to grow together even when growth was painful. He and Elena had fought, of course, spectacular arguments that echoed through their apartment and left them both exhausted. But they had also made up, each reconciliation strengthening the bond between them, each conflict teaching them something new about themselves and each other. On their 5th anniversary, they returned to the Grand Meridian Hotel, where it had all begun. They stood at the window of the same penthouse suite, looking out at the same skyline, remembering the night that had changed everything. "Can you believe it has been 5 years?" Elena asked, leaning against him. "Sometimes it feels like 5 minutes. Sometimes it feels like 50 years. She laughed. "Which is it right now?" Michael considered. "Right now it feels exactly right." Elena turned to face him, her eyes serious. "I want to say something. Something I should have said a long time ago." "What?" "Thank you." She took his hands in hers. "Thank you for not running. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me even when loving me was complicated and difficult and terrifying." Michael pulled her close. "Loving you has never been difficult. Everything else has been difficult. But loving you." He kissed her softly. "That has always been the easiest part." They held each other in the candlelight, two people who had found their way through impossible circumstances to something that looked a lot like happily ever after. Later that night, after they had returned home and relieved the babysitter and checked on Sophia sleeping peacefully in her room, Michael sat alone in his study. He was thinking about everything that had led him here, the choices he had made, the compromises he had accepted, the principles he had maintained and the ones he had bent. He had become someone different over these 5 years, not unrecognizably different but evolved. He was still a prosecutor, still a believer in justice, still committed to the rule of law. But he was also a husband, a father, a son-in-law, a member of a family whose history was complicated and whose future was still being written. He thought about what he would tell Sophia someday when she was old enough to understand. About her grandfather, the Mafia Boss, who had spent his life trying to move his organization toward legitimacy. About her mother, the lawyer who had grown up with one foot in shadow and one in light. About him, the prosecutor who had learned that justice was more than convictions and sentences, that right and wrong were not always as clear as he had once believed. He would tell her the truth, he decided, not all at once, but gradually, as she grew ready to hear it. He would tell her that life was complicated, that good people sometimes did questionable things, that the measure of a person was not perfection, but the willingness to keep trying, keep growing, keep loving, even when love was hard. He would tell her that she came from a family of survivors, people who had faced impossible choices and found ways to live with the consequences, people who had protected each other through storms and emerged stronger on the other side. He would tell her that her legacy was not written yet, that she could become anyone, do anything, build any life she chose, that the shadows of the past did not have to define the light of the future, and most of all, he would tell her that she was loved, fiercely, unconditionally, eternally loved by two parents who had risked everything to be together and would do it again without hesitation. The door to his study opened and Elena appeared, wearing pajamas and a sleepy smile. Coming to bed. Michael rose and crossed to her, taking her hand. Coming. They walked through the quiet apartment together, past Sophia's room where their daughter dreamed whatever dreams 5-year-olds dream, past the photos on the walls documenting holidays and birthdays and ordinary moments that had somehow become precious. They climbed into bed and curled together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen every day to stay. Outside, the city never slept. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lights flickered in towers of glass and steel. Somewhere out, there deals were being made and crimes were being committed and justice was being served, all the messy, complicated business of human beings trying to live their lives. But here, in this room, there was peace. There was love. There was home. On their wedding night, he had sensed something off. He had not known then that his bride was the daughter of a mafia boss. He had not known that the revelation would shatter everything he thought he understood and rebuild him into someone new. He had not known that the journey ahead would be full of fear and wonder, danger and devotion, impossible choices and unexpected grace. But he knew now. He knew that every moment had been worth it, that every struggle had led him here, that the life he had built, however imperfect, was exactly the life he was meant to live. He held Elena close and closed his eyes, ready for whatever dreams might come. And in the morning, when the sun rose over Manhattan and Sophia came bounding into their room demanding pancakes, he would rise with gratitude and purpose, and the steady certainty of a man who had finally found his place in the world. A man who understood that home was not a location, but a choice. A man who chose every day to love. If you have watched this far, it is because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I have watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. And while you are here, tap that subscribe button if you have not already. This channel is full of stories that will make you feel something real, something deep, something you will carry with you long after the screen goes dark. Hit the like button to let me know this story mattered to you, and share it with someone who needs to believe in complicated love, in second chances, in the power of family to transform us. Until next time, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and remember that every storm eventually ends, and every night eventually gives way to morning.